agent in Criminal Investigation Division. And when he heard about some of the things that you're hearing about now, he investigated himself. And he became a student of Freedom Law School with Paymon. They worked together, and he created a book that he submitted to his superiors. He'll tell you his story. But later, after he resigned, they came after him, and they charged him, and he went to court. And Paymon and I were there in the courtroom when they were doing the prosecution, and they came back with the right answer, an acquittal. Afterward, we talked to the jurors outside the courtroom. We said, how did you come to the right decision? And they said, he was just asking questions. They wouldn't give him the answers. And we're not going to put someone in jail for asking questions, not on my watch. So that was a very good insight to having a proactive defense, being a foundation defense, which is basically setting a reliance defense and asking questions. The jurors really can understand when you're asking questions, they have the same questions. And when someone doesn't want to answer them, they don't like that either. So that can certainly help get them on your side. So with that, with no further ado, I'm very honored and thankful and humbled and proud and glad to bring up Joe Bannister. Joe, come on up if you're ready, buddy. Let's bring him up. Yeah, stand. Everybody stand. That would be great. He deserves it. Every bit of it. Thank you, Joe. Thank you.
Forward with the green. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. How's everyone doing? The eyes are getting a little older, so excuse the glasses. All right, and let's see how this works. Oh, too far. Okay. I'm glad I know about the red button too. Where's the eject button? All right. All right, so I entitled my talk, Favored Fed to Enemy of the State in 11 Years Flat. You know, like when they talk about how quickly someone can run the quarter mile or whatever it might be, or the 50-yard dash or 100-yard dash, because I was sworn in, swore an oath to the Constitution in November of 1993, and 11 years later, in November 2004, I was indicted by the same feds that I had worked for and worked with. So I think you'll find the story interesting. When I first decided or realized that the accounting profession, which is the degree that I received or earned, and then worked in public accounting for a while, it took me a while to realize that accounting is boring. So you can tell I'm a slow learner, right? So I decided to spice things up a bit and apply to law enforcement jobs. And having an accounting degree and a CPA, it's not like, nothing against uniformed police officers, but I wanted to do something that might, expand my horizons with the training and experience that I already had. So I wanted to be an FBI agent because back in the 90s, they still had a little bit of a good reputation. And of course, compared to the IRS, doesn't everybody have a better reputation? But I had a really good friend, kind of a mentor, and he said I should apply to more than one agency. So I applied to both the FBI and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, again, with an accounting degree and, CPA and all that experience. It kind of made sense to at least apply to the IRS, but, I wasn't really that interested in working for the IRS, and you can probably guess why, because of that not so good reputation. The IRS has an interesting recruiting poster. I think it's still around because they still like to tout how the IRS agents, special agents, the gun carriers were the ones that took down Al Capone. Be an accountant with conviction. They're really pretty clever with their recruiting. So it was November 1993. I was sworn in at the Oakland, California Federal Building. Usually they'll have 20, 30, 40 employees all sworn in at the same time, you know, kind of like when they swear in new citizens, big crowds. And so I was sworn in all by myself with my family, certain members of my family present. And so it was a very meaningful and memorable occasion. And of course, I was mindful even at that point about that I was swearing an oath to support and defend the Constitution, you know, without mental reservation or purpose of evasion. And I took that oath before God. So I did take it very seriously. This was my first business card there. And interestingly enough, it was a really different environment in the IRS. My boss got mad that I put CPA after my name. And for anyone that has, you know, some letters after their name, you know, there's certain parameters about how you can use the letters and all. And so, you know, the Board of Accountancy had no problem with having CPA on my business card, even if I was an IRS special agent, but my boss did. So he wanted me to get rid of it. Kind of just an odd first few days in my new career there at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. So I come from a family of terrorists. So for those that are familiar with the California law enforcement, the brother on the far left in the tan uniform, California Highway Patrol. Those that aren't never seen California, you know, remember the show Chips. His first duty station was at the office where they filmed Chips. And his first day on the job, pretty much, he and his training officer pulled over 4 armed bank robbery suspects. So then he was in the, he was riding shotgun, literally, on a fire truck in the Rodney King riots. Then the next brother over, Jeff, he's the baby brother, and he's a San Jose police officer, not yet quite retired. In the middle is my mom, Ann. You know, those are the terrorists that she raised. And my dad wasn't pictured. He died the previous July, and would have been, you know, always was a big cheerleader for his sons. And but that's the only reason he's not pictured there. Then Jim, he's a battalion chief with the Daly City Fire Department. That's just south of San Francisco. And then the pencil neck guy there with the Treasury badge and gun. So love my family. That's my dad's brother, about 30 years with the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office, retired. I love my brown hair there. That disappeared quite a while ago. So I was sworn in November of 1993 and then sent to training in Glencoe, Georgia, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. And so one of the tactics of people that want to detract from, you know, speakers or people that are trying to tell the truth is that they're bozos, they're crazy, they got some agenda. So I thought I'd just show a little bit about, you know, how motivated I was during training. I earned a 95% average academic score in training. I was president of both training classes. And I received a memorandum of appreciation for my twice being, you know, elected class president and then re-elected for the second phase of the training. I like this shirt. So as president, actually the reason they even had an election for president was to choose the class t-shirt, you know, so you really have some big responsibilities. And so the class had like 42 trainees, and I'd say, you know, 40 of them were accountants and a couple or maybe like former deputy sheriffs or something like that. But the majority were accountants. So I thought that, you know, this would be an appropriate shirt for them to bring back once they were through with their training. Worst nightmare, an accountant with a gun. So here's some pictures of the fun and games that I would enjoy. Every 3 months as a special agent, you would have to qualify with your firearm in order to keep it and, you know, keep your job basically. So the black and white picture, we did a Citizens Police Academy in East Palo Alto, California. And I wasn't trying to hold up these people here. It was actually pitch dark. And the photographer was able to open up the aperture and make it look like it was light, but it was pitch dark. And we were doing a demonstration to the citizens because they thought, well, can't you just shoot the gun out of the bad guy's hand? Why do you got to shoot him, right center mass? And so this was a gun with a laser. The innards had been taken away. What happened to the presentation? Okay. The innards of the gun had been taken away, and there's a laser that was put inside instead. And so we were able to give the gun to the citizen and say, go ahead, try to shoot the gun out of the bad guy's hand. Had a screen that was much like this, and needless to say, they weren't able to shoot the gun out of the guy's hand, so they gained a better understanding. So I call these the pre-enlightenment days at the IRS, when I was still naive enough to think that I could, do a good job there, be honorable, that the agency had a bad reputation, but was, largely honorable. But I was able to rise to the highest level of management, non-management, I should say, grade 13, before I even hit my 5-year employment anniversary. Received the Superior Performance Award, Sustained Superior Performance Award. Top Athlete Award, not for the entire country, just for the Central California District. It was primarily because I had a low body fat. That was my secret. I was the Asset Forfeiture Coordinator for the Central California District, Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force Coordinator, and Firearms and Defensive Tactics as well. So the same boss that didn't like CPA after my name, the first day on the job, I didn't have any casework, right? Because I didn't go out and make any cases, and I wasn't assigned any cases because I was brand new. But I came from the private sector, and I came from, the Bannister upbringing where you don't just sit and twiddle your thumbs and get paid for it. You actually want to do work, right? Like you're being paid to do. But I had nothing to do, so I saw an Internal Revenue Code, and I started to flip through the pages to the sections that involve the criminal violations of the tax code. And the same boss that didn't like the CPA after my name came up to me and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm just looking at the criminal statutes that I'm going to be investigating in the Internal Revenue Code." And he said, "Put down that book. You're not a CPA anymore. You're an IRS special agent." And I thought, put down the laws? Don't learn the laws that I'm actually going to be enforcing? So quite the culture shock. So one of the difficulties I ran into is, of course, I was an avid talk radio listener, and there wasn't breaking any rules to listen to talk radio while I was driving around in my government car doing my investigations. And there's a radio station, it's still there, KSFO. So I would listen pretty avidly to the radio station. There was a show hosted by a gentleman named Jeff Metcalf. And anybody ever heard of DV Kid? Well, DV was a guest on Jeff's show, and she claimed that most Americans weren't required to pay the federal income tax. And I'm literally driving around in my government car with my, Sig Sauer on my hip and bulletproof vest in the trunk and handcuffs and small on my back. And I'm like, "Lady, this tax ain't voluntary." So at this point, I'd earned a accounting degree from San Jose State, CPA as of 1991. And then I was an IRS special agent as of 1993. And, up till that point, I thought no one credible, no one believable, no one who's really telling you the truth could make claims like that about the income tax. But being that I was a trained investigator, I kind of had the skills already possessed to do something about it. So, as would be typical with an investigator, use your own training, gather evidence, interview witnesses, present the evidence to appropriate personnel. What's interesting, and they, of course, still do this, and of course, how many people think that the COVID thing was a scam? Everyone. What a surprise. But you know how they call you COVID deniers, and they've got all these nice little words that they use that they can throw out on the mainstream media. Well, tax protester, illegal tax protester, they do everything they can to keep people from looking and observing and making up their own mind. So they call you names and in hopes that no one will listen to you or even give you, 2 seconds to say anything so that they might listen. But I went ahead and called people that were called tax protesters, and Paimon was called a tax protester at one point. Called Paimon, called various people that some of the names you might recognize, and I began to really dig deeply into the Internal Revenue Code, because despite a degree in accounting, CPA exam passing, getting the CPA certificate, was very little deep dives into the Internal Revenue Code. And I think it's purposeful. It's granted, it's huge. There's no time to get that in depth. But during the last 2.5 years of my career at the IRS, I did take a deep dive, also researching court cases. And that's where, Paimon really came in to my rescue, because, people might think, a CPA, they know all this stuff, but they really just give you an intro level training on that kind of research. So Paimon was really helpful, and others, but Paimon was really helpful in showing me black letter law that you couldn't argue with unless you just decided, you weren't going to believe your eyes. So, in the interest of time, I'm kind of skipping over some things. You can certainly go to my website, agentfortruth.com, and learn more details. But what I basically did was, after 2.5 years of off-duty research, where, I literally drove my wife crazy because I already was working 50 hours a week. Special agents work an extra 10 hours, and then they get a premium in pay. So my work weeks are 50 hours. You can add another, half hour to hour each day for commuting. And then you have, soccer coach and all the typical things that a husband and a father would do. And then in addition to that, I was doing all this research because I didn't feel it was honorable to do this investigation on the government's time. So I had to do it on my own time, and I had to find the time to do it. But somehow, some way I did. And so at the end of that 2.5 years, and I would say if I had any bias at all, it was against these claims, these assertions. My entire professional life up till that point was invested in the status quo. And so though I probably had at least a mild bias, but I also was open-minded. And so at the end of that 2.5 years of, evenings and weekends and, taking vacation days and taking trips down to the law library. And this is back in the 90s when, there wasn't internet, but a lot of the legal research, you still had to go to a law library, library that specifically had law books in it. And so I traveled there many, many times. So at the end of this 2.5 year period, I decided that I was at least preliminarily concluding that the IRS was absolutely, lying to the public about what their income tax obligations were, and that the media was, of course, helping that along, and the courts were as well. And I was also learning, which I'll talk about soon, Supreme Court cases that were never discussed in my training. So what I did is I put together about a 95-page report and synthesize the highlights of what I had found during that 2.5 year period. I didn't come up with anything on my own. I just looked as an investigator and do what you would normally do in an investigation. You're looking for truth. You're looking for facts that could be put into a court of law. and get cross-examined by the other side and be shown to be the truth. So in the report, and again, this would have been in February of 1999, I had 3 different topics, 3 different chapters. Due to constitutional limitations, most Americans are not required to file income tax returns and pay income tax. 16th Amendment was never legally ratified. And for those that don't know, 16th Amendment is commonly referred to as the Income Tax Amendment. That's the amendment that was ushered in, and then the government and the media all claim that just created this, they can tax anything but the kitchen sink kind of mentality. And of course, they inculcated that kind of mentality with the public. And that the U.S. government finances operations from the unconstitutional creation of fiat money, not with revenue from income taxes. So how do you think that went over, giving that report to my bosses at the IRS? So the gentleman that I said suggested that I should apply to the IRS in addition to the FBI, Bob Guarini, he ended up becoming my boss at the time when I decided to present this evidence to my supervisors. And so I wrote him a letter that I expected to be shared with Bob's boss and above him. And that letter's on my website, of course, and you're welcome to read the entire thing. But amongst the topics, I said, if the service declines to conduct its own analysis or dismisses the evidence in this report without proper review, then I must tender my resignation. My oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States was made to God, and I cannot serve 2 masters. So Bob did what I asked. He gave my report to his immediate supervisor. You can see on this letter, Mr. Paul Varville. They used to call them chiefs in those days. It's basically the special agent in charge, which you'll see all the other agencies used. And then the IRS belatedly came along. So the special agent in charge was given my report. And it took a while. You can see that the letter to Bob was on February 8th. And so this letter is February 17th, right? So about 10 days it took to percolate, up the chain of command, up to the headquarters and IRS headquarters, and then percolate back down. And then the chief, this Paul Varville, in addition to the letter, he gave me kind of an explanation. And he said, Joe, what I'm about to tell you is what I've been told to tell you. Like as if, okay, like you don't speak for yourself. You're only communicating something from above. But he said that, this is what I've been told to tell you. He's very nervous. But he wrote in the letter, the IRS will not be responding to your request and will provide you with the necessary paperwork to tender your resignation. And so I was immediately placed on administrative leave after being given this letter. And so I went home and basically had a week to think about what I should do next. So the IRS didn't fire me. They just sent me home. They took my gun, my badge, left me with a pager. For the older people, you know what a pager is. That was the cord, the hook that they would grab you with. So I kept my pager, and I can't remember if I even kept my credentials. But I mean, they took the gun, the badge. I think they did take the credentials. Just gave me a pager and said, "Go home, and we'll call you. Don't call us, or let us know if what you decide to do." So they didn't fire me. So during that week, and dodging my wife hitting me over the head with a frying pan for having taken her through this entire process of a pay cut to come out of the private sector into the public, into government, being in training while our youngest son was a colicky infant, all kinds of suffering and sacrificing that she went through, me telling her how great it would be to be serving the Treasury Department and, you know, being a federal law enforcement officer, and then have to come home and say, honey, you know that job that I love so much? You know, I think I'm going to have to resign from it. So it was a very difficult time. But I figured during that week that, you know, I do have a pretty good reputation, if I do say so myself. And I think if I stick around here, that reputation is going to get trashed real fast. I just didn't trust that that's how, you know, things would go in my favor. So I composed the letter to Commissioner Rosati. He was the IRS commissioner at the time. And I said, and notice the date, have a little fun fact about the date, February 25th, 1999, that was my birthday.
So real.
Based on the obvious futility of continuing to work for an agency that has standards and practices so different from what it professes, and standards and practices so contrary to my own, I'm officially resigning from the position of IRS CID Special Agent, effective as of the date of this letter. So, yeah, it was, I mean, I just quit the job cold turkey, put my faith in God. I mean, it's clear from scripture that you're supposed to trust in God. So I thought I'd give that a try. And it works wonders. So just again, in the interest of time, I definitely saw plenty of evidence to prove that the 16th Amendment was fraudulently ratified. The work of Bill Benson, you know, was instrumental in me coming to that conclusion. Some, what I say, a scenario that also reinforced that is years later, Bill Benson was accused by the DOJ of lying about his evidence that the 16th Amendment had not been ratified. And they sued him to get an injunction so that he couldn't talk about it anymore. And so Bill tried to defend himself by showing the evidence that he was telling the truth. And the judge wouldn't allow Bill to bring in the evidence to prove he was telling the truth. So, yeah, what else is new? Exactly. So interestingly enough, and I believe Paimon, you know, talks about this at length also, even if ratified, the 16th Amendment did not expand federal taxing power. So whatever power the federal government had at the very foundation of our country is still supposed to be the same power today. So says the Supreme Court. And here's a few excerpts of those cases. Provisions of the 16th Amendment conferred no new power of taxation. That's not Joe Bannister saying that. That's the U.S. Supreme Court. 16th Amendment does not extend the taxing power to new or accepted subjects. I think I went too fast there. As repeatedly held, the 16th Amendment did not extend the taxing power to new subjects. So I can tell you that I'm still completely confirmed that Americans don't have income, as that term is defined over and over again in the United States Supreme Court. And again, from the Supreme Court, the gains derived from capital, from labor, or from both combined. That's what constitutional income is. Gain profit, something of exchangeable value, proceeding from the property, severed from the capital, being derived. So after I resigned, there was, you know, again, the internet was still somewhat burgeoning and new. But there was a stir, shall we say, that, you know, I was the first, and I believe still the only guy crazy enough to say these things about the IRS and come from their criminal investigation division. But I ended up being on C-SPAN and MSNBC, CNBC, 60 Minutes, New York Times. And I thought, well, this is great, not because I'm a humble guy, but, you know, I wanted the attention, not for myself, but because I thought, well, then this will get the American people to learn about these things, and then maybe we can do something about it, right? Because one-on-one, the IRS can pick people off a lot easier. But if we as a group are aware of how the injustices are being perpetrated, we can do something about it. Well, remember when I talked about being naive? There's a little more to that story. So you're probably also aware of Sherry Jackson, a wonderful lady that I had the honor of meeting many years ago, and we're still great friends. John Turner, haven't really talked to John in a long time, but anyway, these were ads that were put in the USA Today, full-page ads, trying to get the word out about our beliefs and the evidence that we had all accumulated and validated. In July of 2001, Bob Scholes of the We the People Foundation was successful. He did a hunger fast, stopped eating, and just walked the halls of Congress trying to get congressmen and women to do something about all this evidence that we had accumulated about the true application of the income tax. And Congressman Roscoe Bartlett was the congressman that came forward and assisted Bob with trying to get some answers. And so Congressman Bartlett literally got the Department of Justice, a very high up official in the Department of Justice, to agree to meet with a group of citizens and discuss the application of the federal income tax. So he literally put in handwriting this gentleman from the DOJ that he would supply people to iron out these questions about the income tax. Dan Bryant was his name. I will do everything within my power to ensure that the DOJ will provide appropriate representatives. Interestingly enough, the IRS official wouldn't put anything in writing that they would supply IRS personnel. It was only verbal, only oral. So notice the date there, the 20th of July, 2001. Anyone know what happened a few months after that? 9/11. I'm not saying that this was why, but I also believe that they always have, little things like false flags and things in their hip pocket in case the people get a little too boisterous. So this was, let's see, I'd resigned in February of 99. And so after 2-3 years of me just continuing to ask questions and occasionally getting some media to be interested, the IRS had definitely had enough of my, questioning and asking questions. So in November of 2004, I was indicted along with a client for conspiracy, basically tax perjury, and this was in Sacramento, California. And that was even more fun for the family. And that's why I say 11 years flat. So basically November of 93 to November of 2004, that was the journey. And it wasn't exactly, what you tell your kids to rise to the level of, start with swearing to the Constitution and end with indictment. So those counts were against both myself and my client, and I had 4 charges altogether. 3 counts of preparing false federal income tax returns and 1 count of conspiracy to defraud the United States. So the government propaganda machine is well-oiled and shifted into high gear. This is from the Department of Justice. Certified public accountant and Reading business owner charged in tax conspiracy. Blatant and far-reaching defrauding of honest taxpayers by these 2 individuals warrants an aggressive federal prosecution. Special agent in charge says taxpayers shouldn't be taken in by false descriptions of law or misrepresentations of the facts. And I like the part about we're adversely affected by the actions of Mr. Bannister and Mr. Thompson. So Laura Ingraham had me on her show at one point, but not to talk about the income tax per se, but about the fraud that goes on with Social Security numbers. And I had the opportunity to say the IRS is the original deep state operation, so I really enjoyed being able to say that. So, anybody remember this guy? I think you'll like this part of the story. So guess where he came from before he was doing all the Trump skullduggery? He was actually the top guy in the DOJ tax division. And he was the top guy from 2001 to 2005. And I was indicted in November of 2004. And this is the guy that signs off on those kinds of things. So he really paid his dues well, didn't he? So conspiracy to defraud the United States, and prepared 3 false amended tax returns. And the problem for the IRS and the DOJ was that they trained me a little too well. So my attorney, I had 2 attorneys, Jeff Dickstein and Bob Bernhoft, fantastic men for sure. And so Jeff Dickstein here, pictured with the boxes, said, "Joe, I need you to send me all of your research." So he had to take his picture. And then when we asked for, one of the things you can do when you're indicted is you can ask for more time to prepare for trial. So Jeff actually attached this picture to the motion to ask for more time. And it was granted, yes. So just some highlights from the trial. Ross had talked about a few things. The prosecution tried to disqualify one of my 2 defense attorneys, Bob Bernhoft, who wasn't pictured, tried to disqualify Bob from my defense team. I only had 2 attorneys. There were some background attorneys and paralegals, but 2 attorneys that were to appear in court with me, and they tried to get rid of one of them before the trial even began. The government put on a 28-year veteran IRS agent. He was supposed to be their expert, but he couldn't point out anything false in the returns that they claimed I prepared falsely. And witness after witness was questioned under cross-examination. Did you observe any conspiracy? Did you observe any agreements, any handshakes, anything like that? And they all had to testify, no, they didn't see any conspiracy. The case investigator, he and I used to work together. We used to train together. We'd have our firearms qualifications every quarter. He was the one that ended up investigating me for 3 years, arresting me when I was indicted. And I found out later from a pretty reliable source that agent actually recommended in his report, where he summarized the entire investigation, that I not be prosecuted. Because after a 3-year investigation, he couldn't find any evidence that I violated any laws. But the DOJ prosecuted me anyway. But this case agent, Sean Breslin, he was called up to the witness stand, as is typical for the agent that investigates you. And he was asked, over and over again, as far as, did you find any evidence of a conspiracy? No. So he basically thankfully was truthful on the witness stand as he was in his report, that he didn't find any evidence. And I guess somehow the government thought that they were going to win a case when their own case investigator couldn't testify to finding any dirt. This is another interesting story. I'll try to tell it in a way that's understandable, but I guess it's claimed that when we say we have questions and we want answers, and the government says, well, we've already answered you. And I came to the IRS building that I used to work at a few years after I resigned, and I encountered a tax prosecutor that I used to work directly with. I was the investigator and he was the prosecutor. And so I asked him, because he worked for the Department of Justice, well, first of all, he said, Joe, it's really too bad that you've decided to side or be friends with all of these tax protesters and tax cheats. And I said, Tom, you've got me all wrong. I'm just trying to get to the truth. And you worked with me. You should know that I'm an honorable person and I haven't changed. And I said, since you work for the DOJ, why don't you talk to your bosses and actually ask them to arrange for a meeting? And then you can find out if I'm still honorable or not. You can show me where I'm wrong, and then I can tell the American people that I was wrong, and I'm willing to do that. And I thought it was kind of funny. So what he did was, I didn't know this until my trial, which would have been 3 years later. But Tom wrote a letter, he wrote an email to his superiors, and he basically conveyed exactly what I asked him to do. He asked his bosses up the chain of command in the DOJ to have a meeting with me. And he was pretty complimentary that he believed that I was honorable and that I would listen if the DOJ would have a meeting with me. And but there was one funny part of his letter where he said his, meaning my, Bannister's associates are mostly notorious illegal tax protesters who would most assuredly be disruptive and uncooperative. But he thought that I would be a good guy, which I would have been. Anyway, so what happened was, did I not even, I think I left the slide out, sorry. But basically, he was up on the witness stand, and he testified that no one responded to his email. Not his boss, he had two colleagues that were also tax prosecutors that didn't respond. And so under oath, he had to say, basically show this email where he made this very sincere request to have a meeting with me. And they didn't say no. They didn't say, well, let's think about it. They didn't even answer. And that should, it goes to show you what's really going on in the DOJ. They don't really want the truth to come out. And they wouldn't even respond to one of their own attorneys when he sincerely requested, some kind of a meeting to get to the bottom of it. Also in the trial, not one juror ever voted for conviction. Juries, they go back to the deliberation room and they deliberate. And we learned once the trial was over that the government's case was so horrible that there was never even a juror that, wanted to convict me. There were a couple that weren't sure, and they were won over by the other jurors who were really listening to the trial. One of the two prosecutors didn't even show up for the verdict, so I think they were kind of knowing what was about to happen. And so the verdict of that trial, which was in June of 2005, was not guilty on all 4 counts. So there were many consolations after, of course, being acquitted of such horrendous federal charges that would have sent me to prison for a number of years. But there was, the biggest consolation was the way that the mainstream media reacted to my acquittal.
Yeah.
You can always trust the Sacramento Bee to get it right. But notice the little sub headline there. Accountant acquitted of preparing false returns, but still faces the loss of his license. He's still going to pay for being such a jerk. No celebration from the media. This was a little more, at least medium even. Voice of the tax protest movement is found not guilty of helping to file false tax returns. All right, so this is the just for fun part. So I was born on February 25th, 1963. I resigned on February 25th, 1999. And the 16th Amendment was proclaimed to be ratified on February 25th, 1913. As Alex Jones says, you can't make this stuff up. So the bottom line, federal government is deceiving the American public about their income tax obligations for sure. Trillions of dollars of tax paid through deceit, intimidation, and where necessary, illegal force, trillions of dollars worth of property taken illegally. What do I think can be done about this? Educate yourself. There's plenty of free information. You can go to agentfortruth.com. Don't take on the IRS one-on-one. Stay off the IRS radar screen as much as possible. Certainly study. I mean, I was a CPA, trained by the IRS, and it still took me, 2.5 years of off-duty, part-time research to even leave my job. And then, of course, that was, nearly, 25 years ago, and I'm still studying. So I can't emphasize enough to, take your time and study, just like Mom and Dad told you to do in high school. And I also believe it's important to infect the jury pool, especially now when, there's going to be probably even more outrageous prosecutions. Do not, make excuses for jury duty. And that includes even, state, local stuff. Anytime that you can be a voice for the truth, you should do it no matter what. And of course, don't stand by while the media and government demonize law-abiding citizens. And I mean, compared to what, old timers, which I'm getting to be with my white hair, what we've seen occur over the last 25, 30 years, it's only getting worse in terms of this demonization. But we should all speak up and defend one another. I always like to tout the spiritual toolbox, pray frequently, asking God to heal and bless our country, obey the commandments, especially not taking the Lord's name in vain, and be a good example to your fellow Americans. So I wrote the report way back in '99 that I presented to my IRS supervisors, and then 20 years later in 2019, I updated the report to include the original report as it was presented, and then added all the fun and games that I was subjected to after that point. And so I think there's a lot of really great information there, and so I have some books at my table. And I have a radio show on Wednesday nights. You can go to agentfortruth.com and find out more about that. I do it with attorney Larry Beecraft, and we have some fun. We play hooky quite a bit. We don't show up every Wednesday, but there's 100 archive shows from the past that you can also check out. And I think that was it. So,
thanks everyone very much.
Okay. Take a look at this. This is a standing ovation for a reason, okay? These are your family. These are people that love you, buddy.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is good.